The knock on the door was so soft I almost thought I'd imagined it. It wasn't the firm rap of a delivery driver or the cheerful rhythm of a neighbor. It was a shy, hesitant sound, like a bird tapping its beak against the glass. I put down my book and the silence of my small apartment suddenly felt loud. I wasn't expecting anyone. In the 5 years since my life had cleaved in two, I rarely had visitors. I opened the door just a crack, my old security chain still in place, and there she was. A little girl, no older than 5, stood on my welcome mat. She was tiny, swallowed by a faded pink coat that was a size too big. Her dark hair was pulled into 2 messy pigtails, and her eyes, large, brown, and full of a quiet, weary sadness that no child should ever know, were fixed on my face. In one small hand she clutched a crumpled, sealed envelope. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know this child. I had no family left nearby, no friends with children this young. Yet there was something in the delicate curve of her chin, in the way her gaze held mine without flinching, that felt like a whisper from a life I had long since buried. "Can I help you, little one?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She didn't answer. She lifted the envelope, her small arm trembling slightly. Her eyes were wells of unspoken things. I unhooked the chain, my heart hammering against my ribs with a strange mix of fear and an emotion I couldn't name. I knelt so we were at eye level. The world seemed to shrink to just the two of us on that dreary Tuesday afternoon. I took the letter from her. My name, Eliza, was written on the front in a familiar, messy scrawl I hadn't seen in 5 years. A scrawl I had prayed to God I would never see again. It was my son's handwriting. Before that day, before the knock in the letter and the little girl who looked at me with my son's eyes, my life had been simple, predictable. It was a life I had built with my own 2 hands, brick by careful brick. I was a widow, my husband Tom having passed from a heart attack 10 years prior. His loss had been a crater in my world, but our son Mark had been my light in the darkness. He was 16 then, and we clung to each other like life raft. I was a librarian, a profession that suited my quiet, orderly nature. I loved the smell of old paper and binding glue, the hushed reverence of the aisles, the simple joy of placing the right book into the right hands. My home, a small 2-bedroom house with a garden Tom had planted, was my sanctuary. Every corner held a memory. The worn spot on the armchair where I'd read to Mark as a boy, the pencil marks on the doorframe tracking his growth, the scent of lavender from the bushes by the window. Mark was a good boy, a great son. He had his father's easy smile and my pensive nature. After Tom died, he stepped up. He'd make me tea when I came home from work, his brow furrowed with a seriousness that was too old for his years. "You look tired, Mom," he'd say, his voice still cracking with adolescence. We had Sunday dinners without fail, just the two of us talking about his school, my work, our plans for the future. He wanted to be an architect, to build things that would last. I was so proud of him, a fierce, bone-deep pride that filled every space Tom had left behind. I'd saved my whole life. As a librarian, my salary was modest, but I was frugal. Tom and I had a dream of retiring to a small cottage by the sea. After he was gone, the dream changed, but the habit of saving didn't. That money wasn't just for me, it was for Mark. It was his safety net, his college fund, a launch pad for the life he dreamed of. The bank statements were my secret comfort, a tangible measure of my love and security. Over 30 years, I had built a nest egg of just over $200,000. It was everything. It was my past, my present, and my future, all neatly compiled in a retirement account. It was the promise of a peaceful old age, a life free from worry. Mark went off to college, and I was the proudest mother in the world. He'd call me every Sunday just as he always had. When he graduated, he moved back home for a while to save money before starting his career. Felt like old times. The house was full of his energy again, his half-finished coffee cups on the counter, his music drifting from his room. He was a man now, tall and confident, but to me he was still the boy I'd read bedtime stories to. I trusted him. I trusted him more than I trusted the sun to rise. That trust was the foundation of my world. It was a truth as solid and unmovable as the ground beneath my feet. I had no idea it was about to turn into quicksand. It started subtly, as these things often do. A shift in the air, a change in the music of our daily lives. Mark had been home for about 6 months, working a temp job at a local architecture firm, mostly making coffee and running blueprints, but he was optimistic. He called it getting his foot in the door. But then he started talking about something else. A new venture. "It's a real estate investment, Mom," he told me one evening over dinner. His eyes were bright with an unfamiliar fire. It wasn't the steady glow of his architectural passion. It was a frantic, almost feverish light. "My friend Kevin, his uncle, is a developer. They're buying up distressed properties, flipping them. The returns are insane. We're talking doubling your money in 6 months." I stirred my pasta, the sound of the fork against the ceramic plate suddenly grating. "Mark, that sounds risky. You don't know anything about real estate flipping. I can learn, he said, leaning forward, his voice intense. This is the kind of thing Dad would have loved, taking a risk, building something from nothing. It's a ground floor opportunity, but you have to move fast. I saw the ghost of his father in him then, that same impulsive dreamer's spark. It was a part of Tom I had both loved and feared. Just be careful, honey, I said, trying to keep my tone gentle. Things that sound too good to be true usually are. He pulled back, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. I knew you'd say that. You're always so cautious. The word hung in the air between us. Pause. He said it like an accusation. I, who had cautiously saved every penny to give him a life without the fear I'd grown up with. I, who had cautiously navigated the grief of losing his father. Make sure he feels secure. The sting was sharp, but I swallowed it. He was young. He didn't understand. After that conversation, things began to change. He started staying out late, coming home smelling of stale cigarettes and a nervous energy that clung to him like a cheap cologne. There were hushed phone calls in his room, the door pointedly shut. I'd walk by and hear snippets, words like wire transfer, deadline, and don't worry, I'll get it. One afternoon, I came home from the library to find him pacing in the living room, his phone pressed to his ear. His face was pale, beaded with sweat. He saw me and his eyes widened. I have to call you back, he muttered, ending the call abruptly. Is everything all right, Mark? I asked, setting my bag down on the hall table. Yeah, Mom, fine. Just work stuff. A stressful project. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he'd had since he was a boy, one he only ever did when he was lying. My heart did a slow, painful lurch. A week later, he came to me, his expression a careful mixture of humility and desperation. Mom, he started, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. I need a little help. Just a short-term loan. The firm I'm working with, we have a chance to secure a property, but the earnest money is due tomorrow. It's just $5,000. I'll pay you back with interest as soon as the first flip closes. I promise. $5,000. It wasn't a small amount, but it wasn't life-shattering. Still, a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. The librarian in me, the cataloger of facts and truths, saw all the red flags lining up in perfect, terrifying order. The secrecy, the pressure, the get-rich-quick scheme. But the mother in me saw her son. Her boy, his face etched with worry, was asking for help. The boy who had held her hand at his father's funeral and promised to always take care of her. How could I say no? To refuse would be to admit out loud that I didn't trust him. It felt like a betrayal I couldn't commit. Okay, Mark, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Okay. I wrote him the check. As his fingers closed around it, a wave of relief washed over his face, so profound it almost made me feel ashamed of my hesitation. He hugged me tightly. Thank you, Mom. You won't regret this. I'm going to make you so proud. His words were meant to be a comfort, but as I watched him walk away, the check clutched in his hand, they felt like a premonition. A cold, dark promise of the regret that was already beginning to seed itself in the deepest part of my soul. I had a feeling, a terrible, sinking certainty, that this was only the beginning. The $5,000 was not the end. It was the key that unlocked the floodgates. 2 weeks later, Mark came to me again. This time it was $10,000. The first property, he explained, had some unforeseen structural issues. They needed more capital to fix it before they could sell. His voice was strained, the bright optimism replaced by a tight, frantic urgency. Mark, this is getting to be a lot of money, I said, my hands trembling as I made coffee, trying to keep them busy. Maybe you should cut your losses. Pull out. I can't pull out now, Mom, he snapped, his voice sharp. If I pull out, I lose the first $5,000. We're too deep in. This is the last bit, I swear. Once this one sells, we'll have more than enough capital for the next one without needing anything else. Please, I'm so close. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes and he had lost weight. My fear was at war with my pity. He was drowning and he was my son. I thought about Tom and how he always said you don't abandon family when the waters get rough. So I gave him the $10,000. I felt sick as I transferred the money from my savings, the secure balance shrinking before my eyes. The hushed phone calls continued, but now they sounded more like arguments. I'd hear him through the wall, his voice rising in panic. What do you mean it fell through? Where did the money go? One night I heard a crash. I rushed to his room and found his desk lamp shattered on the floor. Mark sitting on his bed, his head in his hands. It's over, he whispered, his voice broken. Kevin, he's gone. The money's gone. My blood ran cold. What do you mean gone? All of it. He finally looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. He took everything. The $15,000. It was all a scam. The properties, his uncle, all lies. He's disappeared. The room spun. $15,000. It was a staggering loss, a massive chunk of my hard-earned security. But in that moment, All I felt was a strange, soaring relief. It was over. The nightmare was over. He had learned his lesson, a hard and expensive one, but he was safe. The bleeding had stopped. I wrapped my arms around him. He felt so thin. "It's okay, honey," I murmured into his hair. "It's just money. We'll figure it out. It's okay." For a few weeks it was okay. Mark was quiet, subdued, but he was present. He helped me in the garden. We started having our Sunday dinners again. He apologized profusely over and over. "I was so stupid, Mom. So greedy. I'll pay you back every cent, I swear. It might take me my whole life, but I will." I told him not to worry about it. All that mattered was that I had my son back from whatever brink he had been teetering on. The calm lasted for 1 month. Then came the day that burned itself into my memory. A scar on the timeline of my life. It was a Thursday. I had a dentist appointment in the morning and decided to take the whole day off. I came home around noon, looking forward to a quiet afternoon of reading. As I walked up the driveway, I noticed Mark's car was gone. I assumed he was at his temp job. I walked into the quiet house. Everything seemed normal at first, but then I noticed it, a faint chemical smell in the air like burning plastic. I walked into the small office where I kept my computer and my files. The little metal lockbox where I kept important documents. My husband's death certificate, my birth certificate, my checkbooks, and my bank login details was sitting on the desk. It was open, and it was empty. A wave of nausea washed over me. I never left it open, never. My hands shook so violently that I could barely type the web address for my bank. I fumbled with the password, my fingers feeling like clumsy sausages. The page loaded. I stared at the screen, but the numbers didn't make sense. It was like reading a foreign language. Retirement savings account balance, $17.42. I blinked. I refreshed the page. $17.42. I clicked on the transaction history, my heart beating a frantic, deafening rhythm against my ribs. There was a single transaction, dated the day before. A wire transfer. Amount, $212,458.33. To an account I didn't recognize. Authorization, online transfer. $212,000. My entire life savings. The cottage by the sea. The promise of peace. The safety net for my son. Everything gone. I stumbled back from the desk, my legs giving out from under me. I landed hard on the floor, the impact jarring my teeth. I couldn't breathe. The room was tilting, the walls closing in. It had to be a mistake, a hack. Someone had stolen my identity. I crawled to the phone and called the bank's fraud department, my voice a strangled croak. The woman on the other end was patient, calm. She asked me security questions. My mother's maiden name, the city I was born in, the name of my first pet. Questions only I would know, and questions my son would know. "Ma'am," the woman said gently after putting me on hold for what felt like an eternity. "We've reviewed the transfer. It was initiated online, but because of the amount, it triggered a secondary security protocol. We placed a call to the phone number on file to verify. The person who answered confirmed all the security details and verbally authorized the transfer. But you didn't call me," I whispered. "We called the primary number on the account, ma'am. Is this not your number?" She read the number back to me. It was Mark's cell phone number. He had changed it in the account settings 2 weeks ago, telling me the bank had recommended updating contact information for better security. The final piece clicked into place. The scam with Kevin hadn't been the end of it. It had been the rehearsal. I dropped the phone. The plastic clattered against the hardwood floor. I ran to his room. It was empty. The closet was bare. The drawers were open, empty. On his unmade bed, right on the pillow where his head should have been, was a small white envelope. My name was not on it. It was blank. I tore it open with numb fingers. Inside was a single piece of paper. "I'm sorry. I had to. I'll fix this." And just like that, he was gone. He had taken my past, my future, and everything in between and vanished. The first few days after were a blur of shame and a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. I didn't call the police. How could I? How could I tell a stranger, an officer in a crisp uniform, that my own son, the boy I had raised, had methodically and coldly dismantled my life? The shame was a hot, coiling thing in my gut. It was a failure of my motherhood, a reflection of some deep, hidden flaw in me that had allowed this to happen. To report him felt like reporting myself, so I did nothing. I called his temp job. They said he'd quit 2 days earlier, citing a family emergency. I called his friends. None of them had heard from him. He had evaporated, leaving behind a hollowed-out house and a hollowed-out mother. The financial reality crashed down on me almost immediately. I couldn't afford the mortgage on my house anymore. The house Tom and I had bought, the one where I'd measured Mark's height on the doorframe. I sold it in a panic, taking the first lowball offer that came along to have some cash in my hands. The day I handed over the keys, I walked through the empty rooms, touching the walls. I felt like a ghost haunting the memories of a life that was no longer mine. All my furniture, my books, Tom's old records, I sold them too. Each item sold felt like giving away a piece of my own history. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It was clean and sterile, with beige walls and a view of a brick building. It had no garden, no worn armchair, no memories. It was a place for someone who had nothing left to remember. I kept my job at the library. I had to. It was the only thing I had left. My colleagues were kind, but their pity was like sandpaper on my raw nerve. They knew I'd sold my house, that I'd had a financial setback. No one knew the truth. I let them believe a bad investment had wiped me out. It was easier than speaking the unspeakable. The first year was the hardest. Every time the phone rang, my heart would leap with a toxic mix of hope and dread, thinking it might be him. Every time I saw a young man with dark hair on the street, my breath would catch. Grief is a strange thing. I had grieved for my husband, a clean, sharp pain that eventually softened with time. This was a different kind of grief. It was a living grief, a wound that wouldn't close. It was the grief of being abandoned, of being betrayed by the one person I thought would love me unconditionally. I'd lie awake at night in my sterile apartment, the city sounds filtering through the thin walls, and I would trace the path of his betrayal. The fake story about Kevin had been the perfect setup. It had made me feel sorry for him and lower my guard. It had painted him as a victim, not a predator. The change to the phone number, the calculated timing, the empty note. It wasn't an act of impulse. It was a plan. And the question that tormented me, that echoed in the lonely silence of my nights, was why? Was it just the money? Was he in some trouble? A debt so deep that he thought this was his only way out? Or was it something darker? Did he resent me? Did he hate me for being the cautious one, the one who represented a life he was desperate to escape? I had no answers. There was only the gaping hole he had left behind, filled with my shame, my questions, and the ghost of the son I thought I knew. I tried to rebuild. I worked. I paid my rent. I ate. I slept. I went through the motions of living, but the joy was gone. The world had lost its color. I had once been a woman who saved for a cottage by the sea. Now I was a woman who checked her bank account 3 times a day, terrified that the meager balance might disappear. Mark hadn't just stolen my money, he had stolen my trust in the world. Years passed. 2, 3, 4. The sharp edges of the wound began to dull. The constant aching question of why faded into a low, persistent hum in the background of my life. I stopped expecting the phone to ring. I stopped seeing his face in crowds. I accepted my new life. My small apartment began to feel less like a temporary shelter and more like a home. I bought a new armchair, not the same as the old one, but comfortable. I put up pictures of Tom, of my parents, but none of a smiling boy with dark hair. I found a quiet rhythm. Work at the library, evenings with a book and a cup of tea, weekends tending to the small collection of potted plants on my balcony. I made a friend at work, a woman named Sarah who was also a widow. We'd have lunch together. We never spoke of our deepest sorrows, but we understood them in each other. There was a quiet peace in that unspoken understanding. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor. The pain was a part of my story, a chapter one had learned to live with. I thought that was the end of it. I thought that was my closure. And then, 5 years to the month after he disappeared, came the knock on the door. The soft, hesitant tapping that would tear open the scar I thought had healed. When I knelt on my doorstep and took the crumpled letter, the world fell away. I looked from the familiar handwriting to the little girl's face. She watched me, her expression unreadable, her small hand now empty. My own hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the envelope. With a deep, shuddering breath, I broke the seal. The paper inside the envelope was thin, almost translucent, and covered in that same chaotic scrawl. The words were cramped, hurried, as if written against a ticking clock. If you are reading this, it means I failed. It also means that Lily is safe. That's all that matters now. Lily. I looked at the little girl. She blinked slowly, her big brown eyes reflecting the gray afternoon sky. Lily. My granddaughter. The thought was so huge, so impossible, it had no place to land in my mind. I know sorry is a useless word. It can't give you back your money or the years of your life I stole. But I am sorry, more than you will ever know. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I was fixing everything. That story about Kevin wasn't a complete lie. He was real. The scam was real. But the $15,000 wasn't all I lost. He got me to sign on as a partner to take out loans under my name. I was on the hook for over $100,000 in debt, and I didn't even know I had it. They were criminals, Mom. Serious people. They threatened me. They said they knew where you lived. They said if I didn't pay them, they would hurt you. My blood turned to ice. I glanced at Lily, who was now quietly examining a loose thread on her pink coat. I panicked. I saw your retirement account as the only way out. I told myself I would pay them off, then invest the rest. Double it, triple it. and put it all back before you ever knew it was gone. It was a stupid, arrogant plan made by a scared kid. I wired them the money, and then I ran. I met Lily's mother, Sarah, a few towns over. We fell in love. For a little while I could start over and I could outrun my past. We had Lily and she was the best thing that ever happened to me. But they found me, the people I owed money to. They were never going to let me go. Sarah got sick last year. Cancer. It was fast. Before she died, she made me promise I would keep Lily safe. That's what I've been trying to do for the last 6 months. But they're closing in. They don't just want money anymore. I don't have much time. I'm writing this from a motel room. Lily is asleep in the bed. She's so beautiful. She has your thoughtful eyes. I've told her stories about you, about her grandma Eliza who lives in a house full of books. I told her you were the strongest person I've ever known. Her birth certificate and social security card are in the lining of her coat. There's a small bag at the bus station locker. Locker C17 combo is your birthday. 08-14. It has some of her clothes and her favorite bear. It's not much. This is the last thing I will ever ask of you. Please take care of her. Keep her safe. Love her. Don't let her grow up in the world that I got pulled into. Let her have the life you gave me, the one I threw away. Tell her I love her. I'm going to lead them away. I'm going to make sure they can never find you or her. Goodbye, Mom. I love you. I'm sorry, Mark. The letter slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the welcome mat. The world had tilted on its axis again. For 5 years my son had been a villain in my story, a cold, selfish thief. But the man who wrote this letter was someone else entirely. He was a scared, desperate man who had made one catastrophic mistake that had snowballed into a life-or-death tragedy. The betrayal was still there, a hard, unmovable stone in my chest. But now it was wrapped in a new layer of profound, gut-wrenching sorrow. He hadn't run away from me. He had run to protect me. He hadn't stolen out of greed, but out of fear. It didn't excuse what he did, but it changed its shape, changed everything. I looked at Lily. She had stopped fiddling with her coat and was watching me again, her expression somber. She had her father's chin, but the letter was correct. She had my eyes. Tears I hadn't shed in years began to well up, blurring her small face. All the anger, all the bitterness I had carried for 5 years began to fracture. What was I supposed to do? I was 58 years old, living in a one-bedroom apartment on a librarian's salary. My life was small, quiet, and manageable. There was no room in it for a child. There was no room for this explosion of chaos and heartbreak. But then I looked into her eyes and I saw a reflection of my son. Not the thief who had ruined me, but the little boy who had held my hand at his father's funeral. I saw a scared, lonely child who had just lost everything. Her mother was gone. Her father was gone. And I was her grandma Eliza, the one who lived in a house full of books. My own grief felt suddenly selfish. My own pain is minor. This wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about the money, the betrayal, or the years of silence. It was about this little girl standing on my doorstep with the weight of the world in her big brown eyes. My choice was already made. It had been made the moment she looked at me. Lily, I said, my voice thick with emotion. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. I'm your grandma Eliza, I said, forcing a smile through my tears. I held out my hand. It's very nice to meet you. Would you like to come inside? She hesitated for only a second. Then she placed her tiny cold hand in mine. As her small fingers wrapped around my own, the sterile, empty apartment behind me finally, after 5 long years, felt like a home again. The first step wasn't for revenge or for justice. It was for her. I took her inside, away from the cold, and I closed the door on the life I had known. A new one had just begun. The first 24 hours were a clumsy dance of discovery. I led Lily into the living room, and she stood frozen in the center of the rug, her eyes darting around the unfamiliar space. She was like a little woodland creature poised for flight. Are you hungry? I asked gently. She gave another one of her tiny nods. I went into the kitchen, my mind racing. What do 5-year-olds eat? I had a can of tomato soup and some bread. It felt deeply inadequate, but it was all I had. As I heated the soup, I watched her. She hadn't moved. She was still holding onto the handle of a small, worn backpack I hadn't noticed before. Her knuckles were white. I served the soup at my small dinette table. She climbed onto the chair and ate with a slow, deliberate neatness that broke my heart. She didn't speak a word. The only sounds were the clinking of her spoon against the bowl and the hum of the refrigerator. After she finished, I showed her the bathroom. I helped her take off the oversized pink coat. Just as the letter said, I felt a lump in the lining. I left it for later. As I was helping her wash her hands, I saw a faint yellowish bruise on her upper arm, shaped vaguely like fingerprints. A cold fury, sharp and pure, shot through me. It was a rage directed not at my son, but at the faceless, nameless world that had done this to him and to her. That night, she slept in my bed. I made a space for her on one side, but in the middle of the night, I woke up to find her curled against my back, her small body radiating a slight warmth. I lay there in the darkness, listening to her soft, even breathing, and I felt a fierce primal wave of protectiveness wash over me. This was no longer just Mark's daughter. This was my girl, my Lily. The next morning, I called the library and told them I had a family emergency. I didn't know how long I would be out. Then I took the bus to the station. The locker area was dingy and smelled of disinfectant. I found C-17, and my hands trembled as I spun the numbers of my own birthday, 0-8-1-4. The lock clicked open. Inside was a small duffel bag. It contained a few pairs of jeans, some t-shirts, a worn copy of Goodnight Moon, and a threadbare teddy bear with one button eye. Tucked into the side pocket was an envelope thick with cash. I counted it, $5,000. It was a pittance compared to what Mark had taken, but seeing it there, I knew it was likely every last dollar he had in the world. It wasn't a repayment, it was a provision for her. Back at the apartment, Lily was sitting on the floor looking at one of my picture books. She still hadn't spoken, but she looked up when I came in and offered me a small, shy smile. It was the first one I'd seen. It was like watching a flower bloom in slow motion. For 5 years, my son's disappearance had been a private shame, a secret I guarded jealously. But now with Lily, the secret had a face, a name. It had to come out. I couldn't enroll her in school or get her medical care without a story, without the truth. My friend from the library, Sarah, was the first person I told. We met for coffee at our usual spot. I started at the beginning, the words spilling out of me in a torrent of pain and confusion that I had held back for half a decade. I told her about Mark's scheme, the stolen money, the empty house, the years of silence. And then I told her about the knock on the door. When I finished, tears were streaming down my face. Sarah just reached across the table and took my hand. She didn't offer platitudes or judgments. She just squeezed my hand and said, "Eliza, you've been carrying this all alone. You don't have to anymore." Her acceptance was a balm. It gave me the courage to do the next harder thing. I went to the police station. Not the local one, but one in the next county over. I didn't want to report my son for the theft. Felt pointless now, cruel even. I needed to know if he was safe. I needed to know if the story in his letter was real. I sat with a detective, a kind-faced man named Miller. I told him a heavily edited version of the story. I said my estranged son had been involved with dangerous people and had dropped off his daughter with me before disappearing. I showed him the letter. I didn't mention the $200,000. I just said my son was in trouble and I was afraid for his life. Detective Miller listened patiently. He took notes. He read the letter twice. "I'll be honest with you, ma'am," he said, his expression grim. "This name your son mentioned, Kevin, and the type of scam he described, it rings some bells. There's an organized crime group we've been tracking that operates in a similar way. They prey on young people, load them with debt, and then use them for money laundering. They're violent. Your son was right to be scared." He took Mark's name and date of birth. He made no promises. He said they would put out a bulletin, see if his name popped up anywhere. As I left the station, I felt a sliver of hope, but it was tangled with a deep, cold dread. The consequence was no longer about public shame or financial ruin. It had become a matter of life and death. The truth was out. Not in the way I ever imagined, but it was spreading, to my friend, to the police. My private tragedy was becoming a public case file. And every night, I would look at Lily sleeping, her face so peaceful, and I would be struck by the terrible weight of my son's sacrifice. He had given up his life one way or another so that she could have one. The consequence wasn't mine to bear alone anymore. It was a legacy of danger and love that now belonged to me and the little girl sleeping in my bed. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal papers and life adjustments. With Sarah's help, I found a family lawyer who guided me through the process of obtaining emergency guardianship of Lily. I used the money Mark had left to pay the legal fees. The letter, along with Lily's birth certificate and the lack of any other known family, made the court process smoother than I'd feared. The judge, a woman with kind eyes, looked from the documents to me and then to Lily, who sat quietly drawing in a coloring book. He granted the petition. Officially, she was in my care. Enrolling her in the local elementary school was the next hurdle. It felt like introducing a fragile seedling to a wild forest. On her first day, I walked her to the classroom. She clung to my hand, her knuckles white. I knelt and looked her in the eye. "You are brave and you are kind," I whispered, a mantra I'd been repeating to her every morning. "You will make a friend today." She looked at me, her lower lip trembling, and then she gave me one of her tiny, determined nods. I watched her walk into the classroom, her little backpack almost as big as she was, and I felt a pang of such fierce love it nearly brought me to my knees. Life found a new rhythm. Our mornings were a rush of toast and pigtails. Our evenings were homework at the kitchen table, story time in the armchair I'd bought, and quiet conversations that slowly, carefully began to fill the silence. Lily started to talk. At first it was just one-word answers, then short sentences. She told me about her day at school, about the girl who shared her crayons, about the funny shape of a cloud. She rarely spoke about her father and never about her mother. I knew from the lawyer and a child therapist I consulted that I shouldn't push. The memories were there, locked away. My job was to make her feel safe enough that one day she might be able to share them. One evening, about 2 months after she arrived, we were reading Goodnight Moon. As I read the line, "Good night, nobody," she put her small hand on the page. "Daddy used to say that," she said, her voice a tiny whisper. I paused, my heart aching. "He did." She nodded, not looking at me. "He said good night to all the bad things so they would go away." I wrapped my arm around her. "That's a good thing to do," I said, my voice thick. "We can say goodnight to all the bad things too." We sat there in silence for a long time, the book open in our laps. It was a small moment, but it felt like a monumental breakthrough. A little bit of her past had seeped into our present, and our small new world had held it without breaking. About a month later, I got a call from Detective Miller. "Eliza," he said, his voice grave, "we have an update on your son, Mark." I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white. Is he okay?" There was a pause. "Ma'am, I'm afraid I have some difficult news. We found a body a few days ago in a burned-out car registered to your son, about 100 miles from here. The fire was intense, but we were able to make a preliminary identification. We believe it's him." The floor dropped out from under me. I sank into a kitchen chair, the world dissolving into a gray, buzzing haze. I had spent 5 years oscillating between anger and a desperate, secret hope. Now hope was extinguished. The living grief I had carried for so long had finally transformed into the familiar, clean pain of a final loss. He was gone, and really gone. "The nature of the incident," Detective Miller continued gently, "and other evidence we've gathered has led us to close the file on the criminal organization we discussed. It seems your son's actions created a significant disruption for them. They've scattered. For all intents and purposes, the threat is over." The words barely registered. The threat is over. He had done it. He had led them away. He had traded his life for ours. He had kept his final, terrible promise. That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat in the dark living room and I wept. I wept for the boy who loved architecture, for the man I never got to know, for the thief who had broken my heart, and for the hero who had saved his child. All those versions of my son converged into one tragic, heartbreaking story. The anger was gone, washed away by a tidal wave of sorrow. All that was left was a profound, aching love. The resolution wasn't a return to my old life. That life was gone forever. The money was gone. The house was gone. My son was gone. But I wasn't empty anymore. My small apartment, once a symbol of my loss, was now a home filled with the sound of a child's laughter, with crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, with a future I had never expected. Healing didn't come in a single moment of catharsis. It came in the quiet, everyday acts of love. It was in the feel of Lily's hand in mine as we walked to the park. It was in the pride I felt as I watched her learn to read. It was in the way she would hug my legs when I came home from work, her face buried in my skirt. Mark had taken my retirement, but he had given me a reason to live. He had stolen my quiet, peaceful old age, but he had given me a loud, messy, and beautiful present. It was a strange and painful transaction, but in the end I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I had gotten the better deal. My healing was hers, my redemption was her, and my future, once a cottage by the sea, was now a little girl with my son's chin and my thoughtful eyes. And it was more than I could have ever dreamed of. Life has a strange way of balancing its books. For 5 years I thought I was living in a deficit. I measured my life by what had been taken from me. My money, my home, my trust, my son. I saw myself as a woman who had lost everything. But when Lily came into my life, the accounting changed. I started to see what I had been given. I was given a second chance at motherhood. I was given a purpose that pulled me out of the gray fog of my grief. I was given the gift of a love so fierce and pure it rearranges your soul. I never got my money back. I never saw my son again. There are still nights when I sit in the quiet of my living room after Lily is asleep and I feel the ache of his absence. I think about the choices he made, the fear that must have driven him, and the terrible price he paid. The story isn't neat. It's messy and it's complicated, full of pain and regret. There is no perfect, happy ending where everything is restored to how it was. But maybe that's the point. We can't go back. We can only go forward. And my path forward is lit by the bright, curious spirit of my granddaughter. When she laughs, I hear an echo of my son's joy. When she looks at me with those serious, thoughtful eyes, I feel a connection to a past I thought was lost forever. They say forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. I don't know if I ever formally forgave Mark. What I know is that the love I have for his daughter has left no room for bitterness. It has filled all the broken places inside me. He left me a legacy not of betrayal but of life. A life I now get to nurture, protect, and cherish every single day. My world is no longer small and quiet. It's filled with school plays, scraped knees, and endless questions about why the sky is blue. And I wouldn't trade it for all the cottages by the sea in the world. So if you were in my shoes, faced with that impossible choice on your doorstep, what would you have done? Could you have found it in your heart to look past the betrayal and see the child who needed you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and your wisdom always mean so much to me. Thank you for listening.